Hello, I'm Jane Mangold from the Agricultural Research Service and the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center with today's Ag Minute. Last week, Claire Poulsen discussed grasses that were introduced from Europe and Asia in the early 1900s and used in range improvement projects throughout the 20th century. Grasses like crested wheatgrass, Russian wild rye, and intermediate wheatgrass were widely seeded throughout the western U.S. because they were easy to establish, provided quality forage across a broad range of soils and temperatures, and were long-lived and persistent. Although introduced grasses have some very desirable traits, large areas dominated by one or two of them may not meet all land use objectives. Please join me throughout the week as I talk about these historic, wide-scale seedings of introduced grasses, especially crested wheatgrass, and their impacts on land management in the 21st century. Crested wheatgrass is probably the most widely seeded introduced grass in the western portions of the U.S. and Canada. At least 10 million acres of grasslands, both public and private, have been seeded to monocultures of crested wheatgrass, which often remain in monoculture for 40 to 50 years. A monoculture is a large area of land covered by only one species. A field of corn is a good example. While monocultures are desirable in cropping systems, they are not as desirable in range and wildland systems. Monocultures lack diversity, and diversity has been shown to increase ecosystem resistance and resilience. In other words, diverse plant communities have a higher likelihood of returning to their original state following a disturbance like fire, drought, or grazing. In range and wildland systems, diverse plant communities are usually more desirable than monocultures. Diverse plant communities offer forage and habitat for livestock and wildlife throughout the year. For example, grasses like Sandberg's bluegrass and crested wheatgrass offer spring forage, while later maturing grasses like bluebunch wheatgrass and Idaho fescue offer forage later in the growing season. Species like sage grouse utilize a variety of plant species as they occupy breeding, nesting, brood rearing, and winter habitats. Today, land managers are interested in increasing diversity in crested wheatgrass monocultures as they attempt to meet multi-use mandates for public land. Depending on their management goals, land managers with large crested wheatgrass monocultures may wish to increase diversity within the area. Because crested wheatgrass is very competitive and resists invasion by other species, it typically has to be injured to some extent to allow other species to establish. This can be done mechanically or chemically. Other species are then drill seeded into the crested wheatgrass monoculture with the hope that they will establish and increase overall plant community diversity. We are initiating a study at EOARC that tests disking and glyphosate applications to injure the crested wheatgrass, followed by seeding with a mixture of native grasses, forbs, and shrubs. The same techniques are being tested on crested wheatgrass monocultures in Utah, Idaho, and Nevada. One benefit of crested wheatgrass monocultures is that they have been relatively resistant to cheatgrass invasion. Competitive introduced grasses like crested wheatgrass may be used to restore rangeland infested by cheatgrass. The establishment of perennial vegetation, whether introduced or native, may help reestablish properly functioning water, nutrient, and fire cycles where cheatgrass is currently dominating. When perennial vegetation has been present long enough that cheatgrass reinvasion is no longer an imminent threat, native grasses, forbs, and shrubs may be introduced using techniques that have been tried and tested through research. This process has been termed assisted succession and holds promise for restoring large areas of the Great Basin that are infested with cheatgrass and medusa head. Thanks for listening this week. Have a safe and enjoyable